Welcome to another broadcast of Real Turkey Channel. This is your loving, kind, and gentle presenter, Atilla Shalara, saying hi from a sunny Istanbul after a massive snowstorm. Today we're talking about Turkey and Israel relationship or the absence of it because countries have become enemies over the last 10 years, which is really very sad, both from a humanitarian viewpoint, because nations hating each other is the path to war and misery on both sides. It also breeds toxic thoughts among the younger generations and it perpetuates itself. But that's not the angle I'm going to focus on. There are very real, measurable opportunities that both Israel and Turkey are missing by this animosity. And it's really strange because Turkey and Israel have not always been enemies. In fact, up until 10 or 15 years ago, Turkey and Israel were the closest allies in the troubled Middle East geography. Why is this the right time to broadcast this video? Because Israel's esteemed president, Mr. Yitzhak Herzog, I hope I'm pronouncing this somewhat comprehensibly, is coming to Turkey for a state visit, I think, during this month. I don't think it's 100% certain, but my brief survey of the Israeli press tells me it's pretty much arranged. This means at least the, the public aspect of hostility will end to give way to a much calmer and civilized discourse between nations. But unfortunately, the opportunities, which is going to be the main topic of this video, are still outside the grasp, and they shall remain so as long as not necessarily Erdogan or AKP, but the political Islam philosophy remains in power in Turkey. On the other hand, if I've shot several videos on the rise of the opposition in Turkey, if the opposition nation alliance comes to power, I think there will be a very rapid and fruitful recoupling, relinking of both economies and states. Now, why were Turkey and Israel such close allies? I'm sure I'm going to receive a lot of negative commentary on that, but even though neither is a perfect democracy in the Middle East and North African geography, both nations were as close as one could get to a reasonable or acceptable definition of democracy. Also, Turkey, going all the way back to the Ottoman period, has a very troubled history with Armenians and Greeks. Look, I'm not an apologist. What the Ottoman Empire did to Armenians in 1917 is a crime against humanity. And what we did to Greeks in the population exchange post independence war and then in 1966, I believe, in Istanbul riots, which saw at least 300,000 Greeks forcefully migrate from Turkey, is also a disaster, a shame. On the other hand, all empires have blood in there, and Israel hasn't been kind people of Arab origin either within its national territory or in the occupied territories. But nevertheless, until Erdogan came to power, and in fact, in the first 5 to 10 years of Erdogan's power, Israel and Turkey managed to put aside their differences, agreed to disagree in a gentlemanly manner, and cooperated very fruitfully. It was military and economic cooperation, and both nations helped each other. For instance, Turkey allowed the Israeli Air Force to train and conduct training flights because Israel is just such a narrow country and doesn't have much of a hinterland. Uh, Israel helped us via Jewish lobbies in Washington, D.C., to establish a better relationship with the American Congress. But this has changed as Erdogan has turned his face away from EU and a pluralistic democracy towards an authoritarian viewpoint. And Erdogan's biggest source of leverage in instituting his own one man power is political Islam. That is a philosophy which sees all Sunni or even Shia Muslims as one nation, as one flock, and putting the interests of this Muslim community ahead of national interests. This philosophy allowed Erdogan to become a very harsh critique of Israel's state because of the human rights abuses and violations Israel has committed in occupied territories, which is fine. I think every nation that is somehow civilized ought to criticize these practices and the absolute and utterly painful discrimination against people of Arab origin. But there is a way to do this diplomatically, and it's probably more fruitful. That is, working behind the scenes, actually telling Israel what it should not do, and in the meantime, maintaining a friendly relationship, which would have allowed Turkey to become a conduit for the indirect relationship between other Muslim states and Israel. And that role would have been very profitable for Turkey. But Erdogan is not only critical of Israeli behavior, he's also doing so in a very impolite and hurtful manner. And this is my personal opinion. Obviously, I can't read the guy's heart or his intentions. I think his problem is that he's more of an anti Semite than a pro Palestine uh, advocate. This has gotten to the point where Turkey befriended Iran, and you might say, what's wrong with that? Iran is Muslim too. Yeah, but they are the wrong kind of Muslim. From Erdogan's perspective, please don't misunderstand me. They are Shia Muslims. The majority of Turks are Sunni Muslims. What's the difference? Well, remember the Reformation years, Luther? Uh, the differences between Shia and Sunni are as big and bad as Protestants and Catholics. Anyhow, so the relationship has deteriorated now to the point that we don't even have an ambassador in Israel and vice versa. And more importantly, acts of discrimination against Jewish citizens, Turkey, have worsened, and the last remaining non Muslim minority in Turkey, Jews, who have felt more or less comfortable in Turkey, are now migrating in large numbers to Israel, which is really, you know, uh, to the detriment of Turkey because several ethnicities, religions, beliefs in a society makes it stronger and more colorful. So, what changed? Why does Erdogan suddenly want to have a rapprochement with Israel? Well, Erdogan is cash strapped. He needs any money from abroad. More importantly, he knows whether Biden remains president or is replaced by Trump or any other Republican, United States has a grudge against Turkey, which will result in even harsher sanctions, which cost us in the purse in the sense that American banks don't want to lend to Turkey and American funds don't want to take positions in assets. So, not only with Israel, but because Erdogan is so cash strapped, he's also making friends with Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, uh, which have been Turkey's recent enemies, because Turkey has sided with Qatar, and the common denominator of Qatar and Turkey is that they are both patrons of two non governmental organizations according to some terror organization. Please don't criticize me in your comments. I'm trying to broadcast a very sensitive and controversial issue in terms as objective as possible. I think for most Sunni Arabs, uh, Muslim Brotherhood is not a terror organization. Israel and Gulf sheikdoms may think differently. Similarly, Hamas, Hamas certainly has engaged in terrorist acts, but whether it is in proper terms a terrorist organization, I think that's a viewpoint. It's different. It changes from nation to nation. Anyhow, both Qatar and Turkey advocate and help these two organizations, which make them enemies of other Sunni Arab states and to some extent Israel as well. But, you know, times are changing and money comes first. For Erdogan, certainly money comes before any principle, religious or ethical. So he has forgotten his political Islam and turned to Israel once again. So Yitzhak Herzog is coming to Turkey, but to the extent I read the Israeli press, Israel doesn't really have any serious hopes of a full rapprochement. I mean, yeah, trade might improve. Perhaps Israeli tourists will feel safer Turkey, and there will be more of them coming to visit our country. But don't worry, I'm going to talk about the big opportunities. But in terms of a strong and mutually trusted alliance that results in closer linking of economies and diplomatic viewpoints is simply not possible as long as Erdogan stays in power. Because assume a scenario where somehow Turkey solved its foreign funding problem and we have plenty of foreign currencies, Erdogan would immediately turn its back to any promises he may have made to Israel and start Israeli bashing in the loudest and most obnoxious terms that's possible. So let's look at it from the positive viewpoint. Let's imagine, well, I have faith in human nature. Let's say Erdogan changed. Or perhaps he was replaced by a national alliance, which is also nationalist and probably not a great lover of the Jewish faith, but at least their priorities are national, and most of the alliance, with the exception of one party, is secularist in its origin, which means it doesn't really care in its diplomatic relations what the faith of the counterparty is. What could happen? Well, first of all, it used to be that from the Western perspective, the triangle of Egypt, Israel, and Turkey defended security and stability in Middle East because militarily were powerful. Uh, Turkey, Egypt, and Israel is a small population, but Turkey and Egypt have something like 160 million people and huge armies. Therefore, big trouble was avoided as long as these three nations acted jointly. More importantly, I think terror would have become less of a problem if Turkey, Egypt, and Israel didn't harbor the terrorists of the other nation. But there are even bigger upsides here. Let's start with the smallest one, tourism and trade. Um, Turkey and Israel are perfect complements to each other. Israel is very advanced in technology and sophisticated investment goods, which Turkey desperately needs. A lot of Israelis speak some kind of Turkish because they have been their ancestors have been migrants from Turkey. So the technology infusion that Turkey is desperately seeking from Western countries is easiest to obtain from Israel. And remember, we're proud of our defense, industry and our drones, etc. But imagine Israeli ingenuity and patent technology being infused with Turkey's defense sector. We create miracles. And of course, hey, you don't give away your expensive military gizmos, you charge for them. Both countries can benefit. Tourism, obvious. Also, not only Israel, but all Arab nations are suffering from a permanent drought and the worst savages of climate change. They need to diversify their food sources and even look to Turkey for in the far future whether we can supply some kind of water. This sounds like a fantasy, but the biggest rivers in the region, Euphrates and Tigris, originate in Turkey, and with better management, we could pump more water towards Iraq and Syria and perhaps through ingenious waterways all the way to Jordan Valley. But these are small fry compared to the big white lovable elephant in the room. Well, actually, it's not in the room. The elephant is in the water, flapping hopelessly, and it's called the uh, EastMed pipeline. Turkey has so angered Egypt, Arab nations, and Israel, and of course, Greece joined them. Greece, you know, any group that hates Turkey, Greece automatically joins. They have decided to pump Israeli, Egyptian, and Cypriot natural gas undersea reservoirs through a 3,000 or 4,000 mile long pipeline to first Salonika, I believe, and then to Italy. It's really just, I hate Turkey project because it's economically not feasible. I mean, gas obtained that way, even in these tight supply conditions, would cost 2 to 3 times of what a country would buy with tankers, liquefied natural gas. Now, there is a way to pump natural gas from Egypt and Israel, with or without Israel, the Cypriot contribution to Europe, and that goes through Turkey. Why? Because a pipeline from Egypt or Israel to Turkey is going to be only a couple of 100 miles long. Two, Turkey has already a very advanced and rather high capacity domestic network, BOTAŞ grid that reaches the Balkans. And if you can connect to that, the Egyptian Israeli pipeline that pumps, say, 20, 30 billion cubic meters of gas a year, Europe would love to buy that because, as I'm sure you understand, one thing the Ukraine crisis, which is ongoing, has taught the West is that it's too reliant on Russian gas, not to mention oil and coal. And really, at a time of supply shortages, so which are global, not specific to Europe, LNG, liquefied natural gas, simply doesn't help, simply because Asia is short of supplies too. They're looking to diversify. And this Israeli Egypt Turkey pipeline could become a significant alternative to Russian gas. And of course, at the end, it sort of would be historically correct. Neither Ottoman Empire nor the Turkish Republic was bigoted against Christians or Jews in the past. In fact, when the twin Spanish kingdoms kicked the Arabs from Spain, they also started butchering Jews, and all those Jews migrated to Turkey because they were invited by the emperor and they were treated relatively well until 17th or 18th century when Ottoman Empire economically collapsed and all minorities were mistreated. So I think historically we need to be friends with Israel. Of course, not only Turkey or Muslim nations, but no one, no civilized human on the face of this planet ought to forget the misery of Palestinians and the torture and mistreatment piled on them by the Israeli state. But that's a different matter. I mean, Iran is not very kind to its people. Russia certainly isn't. Belarus aren't. But Turkey is friends with all of them. In fact, Turkey has even befriended Serbia, which had only 20 years ago massacred, even committed ethnic cleansing on Muslim Bosnians. So sometimes the national interest precedes religious differences or past grievances, and that will be the point at which both nations join again. As I've said, though, this is too far to be immediately relevant above and beyond Itzhak Herzog's symbolic visit to Turkey, but it's not too far away that you should ignore this video because latest in 18 months, but most probably within the 9 months, Turkey will have an election. And as I explained several times in my previous videos, Erdogan will probably lose. I want to thank you again on behalf of the Real Turkey channel and myself, humbly Atilla Yaşılara, for watching these shows and for your great contribution in terms of commentary. I read them all religiously and I will do more videos addressing your concerns. Please write to me as to what kind of subjects you wish me to share my humble experiences or expertise. And stay healthy and stay safe. Omicron is not over. Bye bye from Istanbul.